panel is looking at the role of nuclear energy and how that can play nicely with renewables on increasingly renewable grids that we're seeing today. Guess some of the context for this would be there's been substantial load growth anticipated over the coming years or decade, partly fueled by the boom in AI. And this has led to a lot of excitement in nuclear energy as being a potential part of that solution. Currently, nuclear power is part of our local energy mix. There's a lot of reactors in Illinois. There's a power plant at Point Beach in Wisconsin, a nuclear plant there. And then there's 2 nuclear power plants in the Minneapolis area as well, for example. But potentially, there might be potential for new nuclear plants in the future. Now, traditionally, nuclear has been large gigawatt electric scale units, and that's still an option going forward. We could build more of those. However, there's increasing interest in so-called small modular reactors, and these have reached a point of being mature designs. So, for example, there's a project going on in Ontario at the moment where General Electric and partners are building a 4-unit small modular reactor. And I think I've broken ground on that project at this point. As well as these small modular reactors, there's more advanced designs of nuclear reactor. They're a few years behind, perhaps, for small modular reactors, but they're an option. And beyond that, there's growing interest in fusion energy as well to be part of a solution, perhaps moving into the 2030s. So we have a great panel here today. I'm going to introduce each in turn and hand over to them to give some introductory remarks, and then we'll move to some questions. So our first panelist is PJ Martin. PJ is Vice President of Integrated Planning at Xcel Energy, where he oversees generation, transmission, distribution, and gas planning, aligning long-term capacity needs with integrated cross-commodity solutions and project organization. So PJ is going to bring us some very valuable utility perspective today. Over to you, PJ.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. So I'm going to try to channel my memory of my slide since I can't see it. But first off, thank you very much for having us. Really excited to be here. Love to talk about nuclear. Just a quick overview of Xcel Energy. We operate in 8 states in kind of the central area of the country, excuse me. Going to focus on our upper Midwest utilities. Obviously, we're in Wisconsin. Upper Midwest utilities, including our Northern States Power Minnesota operating company and our Northern States Power Wisconsin operating company. 5 states, both of the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, serve about 2 million electric customers in that region, about 700,000 gas customers. So fairly large utility. We have a peak load on that combined system of about 9,000 megawatts. Nuclear is an extremely critical resource for us. You can see on the right side of the slide, we have 2 nuclear units in that region. We have our Monticello unit, which is located in Monticello, Minnesota. It's about a 700 megawatt unit. And then we have our Prairie Island plant, which is 2 units located in Red Wing, Minnesota, about 1,100 megawatts total. So all in all, we have 1,800 megawatts of nuclear. And again, compare that to our peak, which is just over 9,000 megawatts. Again, really critical resource. We've been adding tons of renewables to our system, but there's challenges adding boatloads of renewables. We've been adding them, pretty rapidly over the last number of years, but nuclear provides generally over 10 million megawatt hours of clean energy, firm, reliable generation on an annual basis. So that's a huge chunk of emissions-free energy generation that we can count on our system and is a backbone in our portfolio. Just lastly, we'll just mention some of the charts. Apologize, the font's really small on some of those, but in 24, we were about 50 or 64% carbon free. We're moving to 88% carbon free by 2030 with some of the incremental renewables that we plan to add on our system. So we have some pretty laudable renewable energy goals, carbon free energy goals, and really trying to advance towards that into the future.
Okay, thank you very much, PJ. And our second panelist is Tyler Hubner from Google. So Tyler manages energy market development for the central US for Google, helping the company grow its infrastructure sustainably. And it's great to have Tyler here today, given all the excitement around data centers and AI and how this could synergize with nuclear construction.
Well, thanks. Everybody can hear me okay? All right. Tyler Huebner with Google. Excited to be here today. Google is a company that has a lot of infrastructure, particularly data centers, inside which all of the products and services that most or many of us use every day reside and enable us to, for example, search the internet, look on Google Maps, get our email, watch YouTube videos. Anybody with a kid that watches YouTube videos? Okay. So all of this is inside of facilities. We think of it as the cloud kind of colloquially, but obviously the term data centers has been much more in the lexicon here lately. We do, as Google, have quite large data center operations in Western Iowa and have been in Western Iowa since 2007 and growing as our company has grown and our user base has grown, so has the infrastructure that we've needed to keep up with that growth. And Iowa is one place where we've grown here in the Midwest. The graphic on the right-hand side here, this is an example chart that we use in a lot of presentations. The black kind of rectangle at the bottom is emblematic of our load. So basically a fairly steady operating load where throughout the year, this is kind of a yearly January to December type of look, is a fairly constant usage of energy as people are using our products and services. The green is meant to represent for example, wind energy or wind and solar energy. So for many years, we have met our annual usage of energy with renewables, and we have a goal to do that every year to be sure that we're producing enough renewable energy to more or less cover our annual operations. But as you can see, there's a lot of gaps. So as you think about comparing what Google is doing to meet its sustainability goals with what a utility is doing to meet the 24/7 needs of a data center customer and all of its customers, there's gaps in this. There's times when the green is way above the black and we're making more energy, or our PPAs and wind and solar assets are making more, and there's times when they're not making enough to cover our load. So for this reason, about 5 years ago, we switched our methodology. We continue annually to be sure that we're covering 100% of our usage with clean energy, but we also added a moonshot to figure out how we can operate on a 24/7 basis. So on an hourly to hourly basis with clean energy. And that shift in corporate goals for sustainability has then led to changing how we're investing in new technologies. And nuclear is a really important power source for 24/7 clean energy for Google. We also invested a lot in advanced geothermal. We're investing a lot in storage and long duration storage and other technologies like that. But nuclear is a key aspect of what we think is going to be important for the long run. 3 kind of major announcements we've had over the past couple of years. Just last year, we announced a partnership with NextEra Energy. They own the Duane Arnold Energy Center in Palo, Iowa, which is just outside of Cedar Rapids in eastern Iowa, just north of the University of Iowa in Iowa City, my alma mater, for any Hawkeyes out there. Sorry for the Badgers in the room.
We're used to it.
Yeah. So that's about a 600 megawatt facility, and NextEra is aiming to have that restarted by 2029. In the era of power change, our Kewanee plant kind of got caught up in this as well. Energy prices and capacity prices were low. It was not as economic of a resource, and actually a large storm came through in 2020 that damaged parts of that facility, and it really just was not cost effective in that moment to invest to keep that operation running. The math has kind of shifted now with load growth, and particularly Google, because we have large operations in Iowa. It was a choice that made sense for us as a company to make that investment. So we're looking forward to that. We've also made some investments and announcements in the small modular reactor space. So we have made some agreements with Kairos Power. And what we have basically done with them, they are piloting a first small modular reactor in Tennessee with the Tennessee Valley Authority and Oak Ridge National Lab, which has a long history with nuclear power, as their first test site. And then we have agreed to purchase that power and the clean energy attributes that come with it. And if they meet certain prices, we've got essentially an order book to build up to 500 megawatts with them. So basically giving them that financial and sort of commercial certainty that it's not just building one kind of 50 to 60 megawatt type facility, but if they can do it and prove the cost points, that actually they have a forward outlook for that. And then thirdly, this is, I think, firmly in the moonshot category, but we've signed an agreement with an outfit called Commonwealth Fusion Systems that we would be willing to take 200 megawatts of their fusion nuclear energy if they can bring a plant online. They're planning to do that or working on doing that in Virginia. So we are invested kind of across the nuclear ecosystem and think that there's a lot of promise for this technology kind of 2030s and beyond. So.
Well, thank you very much, Tyler. That's all super exciting. And next, we're moving on to our next panelist, Dr. Sydney Lee, to bring a perspective on state government and the regulatory perspective. Dr. Sydney Lee is the Assistant Commissioner of Regulatory Analysis at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, where she oversees utility finance, planning, advocacy in the international transmission markets, and energy efficiency incentive programs. So over to you, Sydney.
Thank you. So I oversee a team that advocates in the regulatory space, both the interregional regulatory space and the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. And here in Minnesota, we receive about a third of our energy from 2 legacy nuclear plants that are owned and operated by Xcel Energy. So we have a fairly large share of our energy coming from nuclear generation in Minnesota, but we currently have a moratorium on any new nuclear plants. And there's been a number of discussions about lifting that moratorium in the last couple of years. I think part of what's driving that discussion is that in 2023, the state passed a clean electricity standard to provide zero carbon emitting electricity by 2040. And the state has been a really strong leader in renewable investment and build out historically for many years now. We have a really excellent wind resource, and we also have a really strong solar resource. And as those are starting to build out, we're also starting to see a lot of short and medium term 4 and 8 hour battery investment in the state to pair with those renewables. But we also have a lot of legacy coal plants that are coming offline in the late 2020s, early 2030s. The state gets off coal completely by 2035. So we know that we're going to have a significant amount of energy that is a more traditional, firm, fossil baseload resource coming off the system. And we also know that in order to get to 0 by 40, we're going to need to have less reliance on natural gas. And when the state passed the 0 by 40 clean electricity standard, they really created a sort of all of the above type of approach to clean energy. There's traditional renewables that are allowed to comply, but then there's also opportunities for CCS, hydrogen, geothermal, and nuclear for compliance with that rule. And over the last 2 years, our Public Utilities Commission has been taking up orders to really hammer out what compliance is going to look like with that standard. And as we start to get closer to these coal retirements, we have to start looking at what a clean, firm resource is going to look like on the system. And we know there's certain challenges with CCS in Minnesota. We don't have good geology for storage locally, so we would need a pipeline, which is both a sort of policy challenge and also adds cost to that resource. We don't have good geothermal, deep rock geothermal geology either in the state, so that one's off the board. And that really leaves us with green hydrogen, which also has some technical cost constraints and may also require a pipeline for moving hydrogen if it's not produced at the location where it's being burned. The state's really interested in medium and long duration storage, and we're starting to see one of our utilities just passed a tariff for a behind the meter thermal battery that we're really excited to see customer interest in. And that was Otter Tail Power, and I think they're starting to see interest from some of their ethanol plants. So that's potentially a large customer solution for increased medium and long duration storage. Excel has a Form battery that's going to go in at a location where they're retiring a coal plant. So we are starting to see some medium and long duration storage investment. We're also starting to see some initial R&D efforts in hydrogen on both the gas and electric utilities. But there's still this question of what about nuclear? And there's starting to be, I think, more people asking if nuclear is a solution the state wants to look at again. We're also starting to see some of our neighboring states like Illinois and Michigan start to either lift moratoriums or start studying what lifting a moratorium would look like. And so from the state's perspective, we're also starting to be curious about what conditions would allow us to lift a nuclear moratorium. And one of the things that we've really been thinking about is that one of the challenges with new nuclear in the state is what does community acceptance and community consent look like? And so one of the things we're really trying to be careful about is if we lift the moratorium, making sure that if we're having a community raise their hand that they want to be a host community for a nuclear generator, that they understand what that is, what waste storage looks like, what the new reactor technologies are going to mean in terms of safety and risk mitigation. And that's something that we're beginning to start exploring as a state.
Okay.
On your slide.
Thank you very much, Sydney. And so now moving on to our last panelist, Tom Content. Tom is Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, which is the consumer advocate for residential and small business customers in cases involving monopoly utilities in the state. He's a former journalist who has followed the energy industry in Wisconsin for decades. And I'm sure one of the questions on a lot of people's minds with nuclear is how does this affect bills and how it affects costs? So over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. It's hard to go over the history of nuclear in Wisconsin in one slide, but we'll give it a shot. So the Kewaunee plant, as Tyler mentioned, closed in 2013 for economic reasons. And in 2016, my predecessor at CUB testified against lifting the Wisconsin moratorium. And that was the year that it did get lifted. At the time, my predecessor said, the Vogtle plant in Georgia was supposed to cost $14 billion, and it's already $3 billion over budget, and has construction delays. Well, it finally went online in 2024, and that from that initial price of 14, the final price tag was $35 billion. And so I think there are concerns about costs, which is kind of no matter just the reality of nuclear if you look at the studies by the consulting firm Lazard that basically evaluates all technologies on an even playing field, nuclear is expensive. As at CUB, we're concerned about costs and the impact on customers who are already seeing energy bills that have been rising faster than inflation. And so in Wisconsin, now you're seeing activity. So 10 years after the moratorium was lifted, we actually now, just last month, 10 years after my predecessor testified, we saw the first notice of intent for a new project at Kewaunee. What exactly the scale of that project is unclear. There's talk of it including multiple small modular reactors stacked together to create essentially a large power generation unit. So our philosophy today is to follow the data on whatever technology comes before the Public Service Commission in whatever integrated resource planning we have before that project gets filed at the PSC, and to look at the economic variables of all technologies and whether nuclear can be cost effective. I have questions about. I think long term, you saw under the Biden administration that there were initiatives to advance nuclear and initiatives to advance long-term energy battery storage, and those as we look ahead, 15, 20 years, I think we're still in a technology race between those technologies, and now fusion is coming on too with some Midwest players. So the concerns we have include the stranded investment. So the projects in South Carolina and Florida that got started, but then after the folks saw what was going on in Georgia, they said, hold on, we're not going to build these projects. And then customers, so we're still on the hook for those costs. And that's an issue here in Wisconsin now because the legislation that is halfway home, it's passed the assembly in Wisconsin right now, would essentially allow for hundreds of millions of dollars of pre-approval costs for a project to really be collected from the customers and normally the way it's done in rate making, we're not going to get wonky here, I promise. But no, the only way it's done, you don't raise the prices for people until the project goes into service, right? And so that's the philosophy that has worked over time, and we don't want to stray from that as we're looking at any technology going forward. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. And so what we're going to do next is move to a Q&A session. So I'm going to get the ball rolling with a few questions to our panel, and then in around something like 8 to 10 minutes, we'll open things up to the audience as well. When we get to audience questions, there's a mic there, which we encourage you to use and ask in person, but I'm also monitoring the Q&A on the app. So I can also field questions from that if people wish to submit them that way. So a first question would be for PJ. So we've heard a little bit about nuclear economics, and we've heard a little bit about clean energy goals, including from yourself and from Sydney. Under what conditions would Excel seriously consider new nuclear, and what role would it most likely serve compared to renewable storage, gas, and other solutions?
Sure. Good question. So, I think we are definitely advocates for for nuclear, but, as mentioned earlier, just some of the cost risk associated with new nuclear, some of the schedule risk associated with new nuclear. In the US, there's a history of 100% plus cost overruns for new nuclear plants. Vogtle is an example of that. Schedule risk as well, where you expect a COD at a certain point in time, it gets pushed out 3, 4, 5, maybe more years. So that creates some hesitation for us. Typically we do not like to take large risks, and obviously have to work with our customers, our stakeholders, our regulators, make investments that we feel are best suited for our customers. As mentioned, nuclear is a great carbon-free, clean, reliable resource. I think the other challenge that we have is development timelines for nuclear. Realistically, at Excel right now, our view is that it would take 13, 14, maybe 15 years for us to initiate the pursuit of a plant and get it in service. So you're talking around 2040. We have done some modeling in some of our past IRPs. In our 2024 IRP, we looked at new nuclear optimized within the model to see when does the model select it. And again, this was pre a lot of the data center load flowing into the models. And we saw that kind of in the mid 40s, I think it was 2047 is when the first nuclear resource got selected in that portfolio. So it's something we're going to continue looking at in our modeling. I think as you see more potential data center load and other electrification load feed into the models, that's going to potentially drive a need that is more nearer term than 2047. But again, I think we really need potentially some policies to get put in place that allow us to get a little bit more comfortable with the cost recovery, knowing the risks that we face with a nuclear development resource. And, we're certainly willing to explore projects. Sydney mentioned like a form battery project, like we're spending tens of millions of dollars on that. We have some DOE grants. We have some breakthrough catalyst, funding for that project as well. That's one thing, but when you start talking nuclear, you're starting to talk hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and that's just something that, we need to be very thoughtful about the decisions we're making for a resource like that.
Okay, thank you, PJ. And we've heard a bit from Tyler about how things might be at Google in terms of pursuing carbon-free energy and his active interest in nuclear plants. If you're looking for 24/7 carbon-free energy and large loads, how do nuclear plants compare to renewable plus storage portfolios to meet your goals?
Yeah, this is why we're investing and looking at the technology, right? Is because I think what we found is renewable plus storage, there's certainly a role. We can do a lot of it, but to the extent that our data centers are looking to be available 24/7 for our customers, there's this mismatch, there's this hole, right? And so how do you fill those holes? Well, today, the traditional power system, we're connected to the grid. There's all sorts of resources on that grid, a number of which are carbon emitting resources that are probably operating in those holes. We fully understand and see the same challenges related to developing new nuclear. And I think particularly with the SMRs, the concept of this order book of like, how can we incentivize the companies that are building this? The cost today is not going to be the least cost selected resource, but Google and other companies like Google can use our balance sheet to help fund that development and get it started, with the hope that as they learn, as solar costs came down dramatically, as wind costs came down dramatically with scale, hopefully if we can build one and then we can build two and then we can build five, we can actually see that cost curve come down in a way that would help bring these SMRs into sort of least cost planning type mode. And that isn't where we're at today, but that's one of the roles Google sees itself playing, is how can we use our capital today to start pulling these technologies down the cost curve? If we never build any, we'll never get started. But if we can build one or three or five, maybe we can get started and pull it down the cost curve.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. And I guess that can help get us to a point where it becomes cost competitive for utilities to invest in as well.
That's right.
Bring things further forward. So we've talked a bit about cost, but we also need to think about social license. So my next question is for Sydney. And what is the role of community engagement in deciding and enabling new nuclear construction?
Thanks, Ben. So this is obviously a really important piece of information and thing for the state to think about if we're going to lift the moratorium in Minnesota. And I think it's probably two-pronged. I think the first thing that's really important is doing education of folks with that really throughout the state, and also probably some targeted education for communities that might be targets for hosting a nuclear plant, to help them understand both what the technology advancements and safety and regulatory requirements are to maintain risk mitigation and safety for the nuclear generating plant. And then also, because we don't have sort of a federal solution for consolidated waste, we would most likely be keeping waste on site, and the community needs to understand what that is, what risk they're taking on, and then also understand what the benefits are to the community in terms of tax revenue, available jobs. A lot of communities that are starting to be interested in this in Minnesota are fossil unit transition communities, so communities that previously had a coal or gas plant in their community that are going to lose that plant and lose a lot of the jobs and the revenue that come with that. And they're starting to wonder if nuclear is an opportunity for them to replace some of that. So I think it's really important for folks to understand what risks they're taking on, what being a long-term storage repository looks like, and also understand, I think it's a relative risk question. And there are risks to having a fossil fuel plant or a large industrial facility sited in your community. And there are risks of having a nuclear plant sited in your community. And it's really important to understand what the relative risk of those things are so that you can make an informed decision. So that's the customer education piece. I think the piece that, from the state's perspective, we're still trying to understand is what are we defining as community consent? So whether that is some sort of community level ballot measure showing the majority of folks are comfortable with the plant, or is it a city council decision, or is it targeted outreach happening from the state? And I don't know that there's really a good model for what that type of consent looks like in the country. So I think it might be something Minnesota has to figure out uniquely for itself. And one of the ways we've talked about that is, as an alternative to lifting the moratorium, there's been a lot of discussion about a study being approved by the legislature. And I think usually in the energy space, when we think about a study, it's a technical study that looks at whether or not nuclear is needed, or whether or not it's economic, or where it should go, and what its system benefits would be. But I think in this case, the state would want to approach that from more of a community engagement, consent study, to really talk to folks that are in these communities, understand what's important to them, and understand when we can decide that we've done enough education and outreach to feel comfortable siting a plant in one of these communities.
Okay, thank you, Sydney. And moving now to Tom, we're starting to get quite a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to attempt to paraphrase one of the questions in the chat. And perhaps this might be one for you, Tom, but others could weigh in as well. When Wisconsinites hear about the possibility of new nuclear power generation in Wisconsin, what's most important to them for them to know from a consumer perspective and to get to the point where it makes sense for consumers? And what do you, the panel, think that Wisconsinites need to know in order to help understand nuclear power and how it can benefit both consumers and the state? What are we missing out on if we don't build it here?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition among states right now to attract nuclear, and Wisconsin's legislature did authorize a siting study on nuclear and has plans to host a nuclear summit in 2028. But one of the concerns is the cost of long-term storage, because that problem was never addressed, but customers were paying that through the years. At the Kewanee plant alone, it was estimated over $300 million just for the cost of the on-site disposal of that plant during the long decommissioning process into the 2070s. And the ratepayers had paid into that fund over many years to fund that. But I think what's fundamental is just the cost differential between nuclear and other technologies today. If we were in a state that actually authorized the PSC to regulate carbon, and as part of the charge of the PSC, and then you would have at least carbon reduction and a price on carbon as a factor to go into for consideration of future costs.
So something just to add to that. So economic benefits, I think, are huge. I think I've seen something from our nuclear team that like our 2 plants in Minnesota drive like $1 billion of economic benefit. We have hundreds of workers at each plant. They're very high paying jobs, requires a lot of obviously technical expertise. So I think that's a huge benefit. Property taxes, pay significant property taxes in both locations. So that really benefits the community as well. So big economic driver that folks should be aware of as well. Obviously, yes, there are risks, but there are large economic benefits as well.
And the last thing I'll add in terms of the benefits to the state, I think one of the things that's frustrating when people look at the cost of nuclear on a per megawatt hour basis is oftentimes that's compared to either an average market cost or sort of an overall curve of resources, but it doesn't take into account that nuclear is a firm resource, so it turns on and stays on until you turn it off. So it's not an intermittent renewable, which are important for the system, but you need a sort of my colleague describes it as a mutual fund. You don't want to be all in on one resource. You really want to have a wide variety because they have different characteristics. Mm-hmm. Nuclear really needs to be compared to gas or coal with CCS, long duration storage, green hydrogen. It's a resource that is carbon free, that is firm. So when you're looking at the cost of it, you can't be comparing it to average energy costs or to renewables, which have no fuel costs, because it really is a different type of resource.
Thank you. And if I can just add, someone earlier mentioned the Lazard study of different costs of energy sources as a impartial and well-used source in this space. And they recently started publishing costs associated with firming up as a function of where you are in the country. And so, for example, in California, because of the high renewable penetration, firming up costs become substantial, and even these projects like Votal, which we've been mentioning here, start to look competitive in that space, at least to the best of my knowledge. Okay, so we're very much into audience questions now, and I'd happily take a question from the mic if someone wants to ask in person, and otherwise I'll keep going from things that have been submitted in the chat. But if you speak, you get priority. Don't be shy. We're all friends here. It's the Midwest.
I might be ignorant, but the difference between fusion and fission nuclear, which are we talking
talking these small nuclear plants, modular plants. I mean, there's still fusion right now.
Still fission.
Fission.
We're looking into fission in the future. Correct?
Right. Yep. The large scale plants in Wisconsin and the small modular reactors are all fission. So the technology that has been proven to work and make electricity. Fusion is, I think there's a number of companies in Wisconsin that are part of this supply chain and part of inventing this. But it's sort of like making a sun. So you're making the sun and then trying to capture the electricity and send it down a wire. So I'm not sure that anybody's ever actually accomplished the creation of electricity out of fusion and sent it down a wire yet. I don't know if anybody else on the panel knows.
Correct. Yeah, we're tracking some of the new fusion companies, but it's an emerging technology. It's not proven. There's no fusion plants that are built yet, or even pilot plants that are really like fully operational. So it's still something that needs a development timeline. Fission is the proven technology. Both of our plants are fission plants.
It's great to see multiple tech companies investing in fusion companies, and there is a lot of concentration of startups and companies working on this in the upper Midwest. And if you want to save the date for May 5th, there'll be a Great Lakes Fusion Energy Summit here at UW-Madison if you want to learn more about fusion at the engineering school.
Thank you. Yep.
I was going to put it in the chat, but I guess I'll just ask it. Is there a scenario where Google might co-locate an SMR with a data center, maybe also with some solar and storage or something like that, and enter into a PPA-style agreement with Excel to sell back excess generation to try and get some of your CapEx back, and share a level of data for the cost, the build time, any sort of on-site storage concerns with the regulators to be able to solve all of the problems that you guys have talked about in a way that maybe helps everybody also bring that cost.
Sounds like a white paper ready to be written there.
I'm just a dumb supplier.
No, it's an excellent question. And I think those types of options and creative pathways are on the table. I think for us, the Kairos Power is building the first facility. It's really is a test facility. And so they've got to get that right and then get to scale. I know there's other SMR companies out there, so I don't want to just, I'm not sure where they all are in their process, but conceptually understand where you're coming from and maybe just taking a big step back to like, that is one of the advantages potentially of nuclear, right? The amount of fuel that you put into these facilities is very dense, incredibly dense. Like wind turbines, you need to build them where they're windy. Solar panels need to go where it's sunny, right? And then you need to move that power from those locations over a transmission line to the customers and to the load. Whereas in particular with nuclear, there may be that opportunity because the fuel amount is smaller and more dense, that it would be more easily transported to a location. You could generate the power and maybe use the power in a more confined area. So that is another advantage potentially to that kind of SMR or nuclear conversation. So
yeah, and with the technology change, with the data center wave happening, I mean, you're seeing this where Microsoft's announced plans to reopen a unit at 3 Mile Island that's been dormant, and so you're seeing there is a scenario where if the tech companies, each tech company has a market capitalization bigger than most, practically all the utilities combined. So if the tech companies want to pay that premium, that's a way to get to get nuclear going, whether it's SMR or the first fusion project. It would, if it can insulate, the rest of the customers, that's something. There could be potential pathways.
Yeah, we have seen some customers too who are looking at exactly that option, locating a data center, building all their generation. There's a Fermi project down in Texas near Amarillo in our Southwest Public Service territory. It's a group of investors led by Rick Perry, and they are looking at building kind of their own sustainable energy campus and looking to us for some amount of energy, but generally looking to self-sustain. So I think we're seeing some of that in some areas as well.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions in the chat around the waste. So firstly, how do we go ahead with new nuclear energy when we don't have a final repository? And what should we be doing with the nuclear waste?
Sydney?
I'm the one who brought up this issue, I think, so I can go ahead and take a first stab at it. So I think it's probably unrealistic to assume we're going to have a long-term national single location where we're going to store nuclear waste. And even if we did, then you have the transportation challenge to deal with as well. Right now, we store on site, and we store in a very heavily regulated, safe, risk mitigated way. And I think for now, if we're thinking about building new plants, that's probably what we should assume we're going to be doing, is that we will have some type of on-site storage. And the plant produces, like Tyler's saying, it's a very dense fuel material, so it produces relatively little waste. And we have been storing waste on site for many, many years at existing plants, and we know how to do it well, and we know how to do it safely. And I think it's important to talk to host communities about that, as I've mentioned, but I think that's probably the solution, is going to be on-site storage, at least for the time being.
And I'll just weigh in. I think we are making process. I started at Excel in 2015, and I was in resource planning. I remember actually looking at like early retirement scenarios for our nuclear plants. So how much things have changed in 10 years. Now we're talking about not only extending the lives of our nuclear plants, but building more. So pretty amazing how the environment has changed. But certainly I think we're going to want to continue to look at other options to build new nuclear. And it's going to be important for us to continue to work with stakeholders and figure out a path. I think in Wisconsin, we're doing some siting studies or getting legislation policy passed to support siting studies. In North Dakota, we're doing the same. So I think that's kind of step one. Let's find out where there is community acceptance, hopefully, and where we could potentially build some new plants and just start taking the steps. Been nice to see some executive orders coming out of the Trump administration about like NEPA reform, making permitting easier, trying to address federal licensing. I read somewhere that in China, it takes like 5 to 7 years to build a plant. It takes us 14 or 15. Like how do we speed up those timelines? How do we make the process less burdensome while still maintaining the same regulatory safeguards and ensuring that we're building plants that are safe, reliable, not putting the community at risk?
Thank you. And I'll just give a plug for the siting study on nuclear in Wisconsin, which the UW-Madison is working on in collaboration with the Public Services Commission. And I came from this morning from a meeting with our students working on that study. So yeah, very excited to be part of that. Any more audience questions, or shall I keep going from the chat?
There's one over here.
Was there?
One right over here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chernobyl?
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter asked me the same thing. We watched that together not long ago, and she said, "Why are they passing a nuclear bill in Wisconsin? Didn't they see that show?" But I think it will. I think the siting study. I'm not involved in the siting study, but I think the Northeast Wisconsin, where we've had 2 plants since the 70s, is going to be the spot where there may be receptivity. But as far along and as bipartisan as nuclear seems to be, I think there will be a carryover from that.
I would just like to add that the Chernobyl reactor was a fundamentally unsound Soviet-era design, which was known to be unsound and is not anything like any of the designs being built by anyone today. The Soviets knew there were issues with their design and had procedures in place to mitigate the safe operation of that plant, and it was ignored by all of the operators as well. So as a combination of a poor design and reckless operations made that a particularly vulnerable case. So we are at the hour. Can we all please thank our panelists? And thank you all for coming this morning. And maybe you can catch one of us at the end if you have any burning questions. But thank you for all the ones that you submitted. It's been helped make this a interesting panel.